separate rooms separated by many miles of geography, so they may not be able to actually fist fight in front of us, but I'm not so sure they're going to be disagreeing as they are kind of coming into a wild sort of confluence between William Henry's expertise as I think perhaps the only professional mythologist around, and Jim Marrs's ability to look at the future and what it may mean to us and kind of overlay that with a little bit of conspiracy. So I'm going to just kind of take a back seat here and listen to these two guys as they talk about energy, our future, and how it's changing, and what that means in terms of the past. Welcome, William Henry and Jim Marrs.
Thank you, Whitley, very much. Yeah.
Let me jump in here if I can, William. I think I can get you right on track. I think, we've just passed the mark here where we have now lost 2,000 Americans in Iraq, and that is, of course, the ones that they're admitting to. There is considerable controversy, as many people don't realize, that perhaps some of the casualty figures in Iraq are skewed, and I think there's something to that. For example, if someone is wounded in Iraq and then shipped to Germany to a hospital and they die there, somehow they don't get counted as a casualty in Iraq. But be that as it may, it should be patently obvious to anyone right now that our precipitous invasion and occupation of Iraq obviously had little or nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. The idea that that was a mistaken belief was laid to rest by the Downing Street memo. So then we're saying, well, we're there to get their oil. Well, that can't be right either, because all you have to do is look at the doubling of gas prices over the past year and the fact that we're not even getting as much oil out of Iraq now as we were before our invasion. So we finally kind of get back to, well, we're just trying to bring freedom and democracy, and that wears pretty thin, too, when you look at the neo-colonial policies, foreign policies of the United States. So there seems to be another reason. There seems to be some other provocation, some other reason that we had to get into Iraq, and I know that you have studied and thought on that, William, so why don't you lay out your thoughts on why do you think we really had to rush into Iraq?
Well, actually, it isn't necessarily a rush at this time. I started talking about this in 1998 with Art Bell, saying, it's well known that Saddam Hussein has this belief that he is the reincarnated biblical king Nebuchadnezzar. And as many prophecy watchers had noted back during the first Gulf War in 91, Saddam had spent over $500 million rebuilding Babylon throughout the 1980s. He did this because he believed that he had to duplicate the feats of Nebuchadnezzar and also ultimately to outdo him. And of course, this was something that Christian prophecy watchers were all over, because according to certain interpretations of Christian prophecy in the book of Revelation and elsewhere, in order for the Lord to return, Babylon must be rebuilt. It must be rebuilt because it has to be destroyed in order for the Lord to return. And so a lot of people were anxious, to say the least, back in the early or late 80s, early 90s, about just exactly who was Saddam Hussein, why did he believe he was Nebuchadnezzar, and why was he spending close to, well, what ended up being almost $1 billion to prove to the Iraqi people that he was indeed the return of this tyrant and dictator from the ancient world.
Well, hey, William, pardon me, correct me if I'm wrong, because my Baptist Bible school knowledge may be a little flaky at this point, but didn't old King Nebuchadnezzar, didn't he build a gold-based artifact in an effort to reach his godlike ancestors and to gain immortality? And then this artifact was translated down to us in the Bible as a fiery furnace, but obviously it was something else because people would go in it and come out of it.
Well, what happened is that in the book of Daniel, we're told specifically that Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon had constructed, well, it was actually located on the plain of Dura, a hulking golden image of the beast, as it was called. And he had difficulty getting this contraption, whatever it was, to operate. He tried dancing, he tried music, he tried clapping. He had this just enormous piece of hardware, but did not apparently have the software to make the thing go. But he knew that
that's why I had to go find those three Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right?
That's exactly right. So what he does is he gets awareness that the Israelite priests, the wise men at the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, had apparently the software to make this thing go. So what does he do? He does what any dictator is going to do. He invades Jerusalem, loots the Temple of Solomon, and returns to Babylon with thousands of captives, among them Daniel, the prophet Daniel, among them Ezekiel, and among them three wise men you just mentioned, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they get back to Babylon, and things are going okay, I guess, for Nebuchadnezzar, because he thinks things are starting to turn his way. But these Hebrew wise men, or Jewish wise men, are reluctant to participate in Nebuchadnezzar's endeavor until he makes a wager with them that if they can enter this fiery furnace that is connected to this golden image of the beast, apparently, and return successfully, that Nebuchadnezzar will convert to their religion. And so
Correct.
this they do, but the amazing thing about it is that you really can't get a handle on this story unless you've been through the works of, for example, Zecharia Sitchin, who's done so much to lay out the original Sumerian text and the belief in these gateways that the Anunnaki gods of ancient Iraq were using to come and go from Earth and the heavens. And one of the key components to Sitchin's interpretation of these myths involves the goddess Mari, or Mary. He makes a fascinating study of the various accoutrements that this goddess wore. She put on a helmet called her Shigura helmet, which means that which makes go far into the universe. She put on her Pala garment, also called her miracle garment, which made her an extraordinary being, also called a Nephilim. And she put on other accoutrements preparatory to entering the gate of the gods. Now,
that's especially interesting because isn't it true that before the three Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, I've always said Abednego, but anyway, and when they put them into this fiery furnace, it states that they didn't just go in, they donned their garments and put on their hats and their capes and their cloaks, which means they put on some kind of protective clothing. Do you think that's the same thing as this Mari was wearing?
I'm absolutely convinced, and that is actually, in my opinion, the whole linchpin right there that opens up the entire Iraq Stargate story, and is without it. I mean, you have a lot of people, Jim, that go around saying Saddam had a Stargate and we're over there for the Arky Stargate event, and I have people ask me about it all the time, and I say, well, explain to me how that connection is made. And they don't have a connection unless they've read my stuff, because the connection comes solely from this event in the book of Daniel, and the understanding that when these three wise men put on their coat, their hat, and the other garments as recorded in the book of Daniel, they are putting on the garments of this former goddess, because what they're going to do is enter a gate of the gods, what today we would call a stargate or a wormhole, a connecting link that joins point A on Earth with point B in the universe, as if there's nothing in between.
Exactly. And to me, the proof of this, and the proof that they had some sort of a transportation chamber, maybe it's teleportation, who knows, but is that when they got in there, King Nebuchadnezzar, who, since he had lost so many people trying to make this thing work, obviously didn't want to get near it himself, he asked his minions, are those three priests still in there? And they said, yes. And he says, are they dead? And then they said, no, they're in there moving around. In fact, there's a fourth person in there. And he said, oh, who's the fourth person? And right there in the Bible it tells us, oh, it's the Son of God. And then that's the end of that. We never hear any more out of that. I'd like to know who that fourth person, the Son of God, was and whatever happened to him, but the fact
his name was Nebo,
and four people were there indicates that it is a portal to somewhere.
Yeah, the name of the person, Jim, was Nebo. We know this because Nebuchadnezzar took his name from this god. Nebu, or Nabucodonosor, comes from this Iraqi god, Nebo, which means the high one, the royal one. Think of our word noble. We still use the word today. It means royal or high one, and he was actually the son of Marduk, one of the ancient Sumerian sun gods, an Anunnaki lord. Not only did Nebo come back, Jim, his wife was with him. And we know for a fact, we know for a fact that the Iraqis, the ancient Sumerians, the Babylonians built ziggurats for Nebo to honor this event. They filled these libraries chock full of tablets about and from Nebo. Now, Nebo is not someone that most of us are familiar with, but you probably will recall or understand who this figure is if I give you his alternate names: Hermes, Mercury, Thoth, Jesus. All of these figures are enfolded in this exact same archetype.
Yeah, all of them messengers from the gods.
Exactly. And so this is where we now come into the modern era, and we pick up the story of Saddam Hussein beginning in the late 80s and early 90s, doing a little bit of mythological research. And then my mythological profiling of Saddam, again, going back to 1998, it's very clear that he identified himself with this figure and was particularly interested in any of that knowledge that was brought to earth by what the book of Daniel refers to as the Son of God, or one like the Son of God, depending upon the interpretation that you read, who was actually Nebo, Hermes, or Thoth, and who bequeathed to humanity immense libraries that contained cylinder seals and tablets that had tremendous knowledge etched upon them.
Now we're hitting on it. See, there are those who say we invaded Iraq to get hold of the Stargate as if it was some sort of a material artifact, like in the movie Stargate. But for me, and I'll let you comment on whether you think I'm on the right track or not, but for me, I think they were after those seals and cylinder seals and tablets because they thought that it might give them the secrets for manipulating energy at the atomic and subatomic level, such as the orbitally rearranged monatomic gold elements that have been talked about and patents have been filed on in recent years. Do you think that they were after a physical object, William, or do you think that they were just after the knowledge that might be in these recently discovered artifacts? And by the way, I have the press releases are news stories from the Associated Press and others beginning in 1997, 98, 2000, 2001 that said they were German and French archaeology teams were making amazing new discoveries in Iraq, specifically the ancient Sumerian cities of Ur and Uruk. And, of course, where would they be taken? They would be taken to the Iraqi National Museum and probably placed until they could be cataloged and prepared for exhibition. And that's exactly what got looted when we invaded Baghdad, right?
Well, absolutely, and it actually began before that with the UN weapons inspectors. When you read the art magazines, they all talk about how many of those inspectors were coming out with their pockets loaded with these lipstick-sized cylinder seals that are priceless. And, you know, you and I, we're guys, okay? We're average guys. We're researchers, and we scour the art magazines, we scour the archaeology magazines, we scour the Internet, looking for samples and examples and evidence of this technology that we're describing here in this science. And
gentlemen, we have to scour something else, the minds of our listeners right now, in order to perhaps get them to open their wallets and buy some of the things that are going to be advertised, subscriptions and books and whatnot. A new car maybe this time. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back. Jim Marrs and William Henry are having a marvelous conversation about what is really going on here in terms of the way the future and the past intersect and who might be trying to gain knowledge from the past, secret knowledge from the past, most notably in Iraq, and how that might relate to our future. I am sitting here like a fly on the wall and enjoying myself thoroughly. It's fascinating stuff, guys, and I'm going to just let you plunge back into it right now.
Thank you, Whitley, very much. Jim, as I was saying, the looting of Iraq actually began with the UN weapons inspectors who were clandestinely removing artifacts. Anything they could take out of the country with them, they were taking, and that was well known. But as you mentioned, without a doubt, we had an absolute target on that Iraqi National Museum. We knew what was there, and look, you don't have to look much further than what is in, like, for example, J.P. Morgan's personal library for examples of the kind of advanced science that is presented on these cylinder seals. I mean, when you look at what J.P. Morgan's boys brought out of Iraq in the 1850s and the 1860s when the looting of that country commenced, we're talking about people having for a very long time an understanding that those libraries over there, which are buried beneath the sands of Baghdad, we've got 20 feet beneath the sands of Baghdad and throughout Iraq are all the secrets of the Anunnaki gods of the ancient world. And it's been my supposition that what Saddam recognized that he possessed was literally one of the biggest bombs imaginable, because once he released this knowledge that's in these libraries, puff, there goes Christianity. Poof, there goes the Jewish religion, because what we start to realize is that these stories upon which Western civilization hangs its hat are literally based upon Sumerian originals. And once that is fully recognized, it brings about a giant question mark about the source of Western civilization.
You're absolutely right, and if that's not momentous enough, though, there's also the technological aspect of it, which is that, we've often marveled and wondered how the Great Pyramid was built, and some of these other wonders of the ancient world, most of which are no longer around. But and we have the ancient records both in the Hindu Vedas and in the ancient Sumerian text of things flying around in the sky and all kinds of things. So we've got the technology involved, which would involve the manipulation of energy. And once we're talking about changing the basic form of atoms, rearranging the atom from within, everything that we think of as reality, the four basics of the earth, wind, air, water, fire, earth, all of that is basically made up of the same atomic structures, just they're different only in their arrangement. And once you could rearrange that, then you can it's limitless. We're talking about faster than light speed travel. We're talking about anti-gravity. We're talking about perhaps time travel or interdimensional travel, and of course this is where cutting edge physics is taking us right now. Well, you can perfectly well see that minds within the Pentagon or within the Langley, they can, not only do they want that knowledge, but then they've got to see that knowledge doesn't fall in the hands of our perceived enemies.
Well, that's right, and as we know, and as I believe you're going to discuss in your presentation as well, the Nazis were very interested in this too, and here's heavy into it, and we have to just remind everyone, as I alluded to a moment ago, this race to Babylon actually commenced in the 1860s when American scholars from Yale, from Harvard, from University of Chicago, from Penn were digging up the sands of Iran and Iraq, seeking to prove that the Bible was true. And they brought home incredible artifacts that reference the book of Ezekiel, the story of Ezekiel, and other biblical references that established in many people's minds that, hey, there's no question that the biblical stories are actually true. Well, they were in a race with the German scientists and archaeologists who were looking at the same evidence, looking into the same temples, but seeking to prove that the story of Atlantis was true. And that was the dividing line, and that, of course, spun into the occult war of World War II, where the two sides lined up to see who was going to actually create the new Atlantis. Was it going to be Nazi Germany, or was it going to be the United States of America? And here we are today, right back in the same place, looking at the same evidence.
With some of the same old Nazis running the show.
I know. Talk about that, Jim. I mean, how does that, you've mentioned that the national security state of Germany during World War II, by all accounts, was on the track of this technology we're describing, and that there's evidence that we have a new national security state of the United States. Talk about that and how that plays into this.
Because after the war, the same ruling elite wanted to continue their quest for this knowledge, and so thousands of high-ranking Nazis, of course, got out of Europe on Vatican passports. They came and established themselves in the United States as some of our top rocket scientists. They went to Canada. It's now been shown that Canada fielded a bunch of them. And, of course, at this point, all of this was not necessarily done in a sinister, conspiratorial manner. It was simply that right at the end of World War II, everybody began looking ahead, and they realized we were going to be in some sort of a war, either cold or hot, with Soviet Russia. And so it was like, well, we got to get whatever allies we can. And so we just brought the Nazis in wholesale, and they folded themselves neatly right into our emerging national security state, which was, given the stamp of approval and the legislative and lawful background in September of 1947 with the when Harry Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947. And, it's really interesting to me that there's a story I got from a congressional investigator who said that Harry Truman's mother was dying back in Missouri, and he wanted to rush to her bedside, but they held him up at National Airport there in late September 1947 for hours just so they could rush the National Security Act to him for his signature and make it law. And why the rush? Well, it was rushed into law anyway because although several things had been talked about since World War II, like renaming the War Department the Defense Department and separating the Air Force from the Army, it was nevertheless, it began to get rushed into legislation only in mid-July 1947, and they had about a month and a half to put it all together. And why the rush? Because I think it had to do with the events in Roswell, New Mexico, the 1st of July, 1947. Something crashed there, and they didn't want us to know about it, so the official approved press release that said, we've captured a flying saucer became, no, they just found a weather balloon, and they were all mistaken. And the whole thing was swept under the carpet, and yet the National Security Act was rushed into being, which, among other things, created the National Security Council, which by very definition, if anything has to do with national security, whether it's energy manipulation, whether it's new airplanes, whether it's enemy intentions, then it's handled by the National Security Council, and that bypassed Congress, the media, and the public. And this is when we began to have this super-secret national security state. And I agree with you, William, that I think at the heart of this was the quest for this ancient technology and this ancient knowledge, some of which has been kept from us, by the way, because you were talking about Hermes and all the various names. Don't you agree that one of the ways they have kept us from really figuring all this out is because every time a new civilization comes along or a new language comes along, they change the names. And so, everybody goes, well, is it Zeus or, is it Thor or is it, the basic concept is always the same, but the name is always changed. And I think that's just to keep people confused.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and that's the easiest way they do it is by changing the language, and we're probably gonna see that in Iraq today. I mean, it's not a joke. I mean, it's very serious that I think we should just change the name of the place over there to America. Let's spell it Ameriqa. Because
guys, wait a minute, Jim. Hello. This is the great voice in the sky here, bringing you both down to earth because we have to take a little break. And when we come back, I'm listening to this, and I have a question for both of you, and I want you to just kind of riff on it when you come back. And that is, why? is there some kind of larger presence here that has that maybe something akin to the New World Order, but kind of even deeper, more deeply hidden, that's got an agenda for this world and this species? And if so, what is that agenda? We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland, and Jim Marrs and William Henry are on the agenda here today. We are talking about, or they, I should say, are dialoguing about some of the most interesting stuff I've heard in a long time. Where are we going, and where are we coming from? What is being stolen from us about our own pasts in order to manipulate the way that mankind goes into the future? Guys, let's just keep rolling.
Well, I'll take a shot at that one, Whitley. I think it goes to what Jim mentioned a moment ago, the Roswell crash in 47. By all accounts, the beings that crashed on that day were what we might describe as the Greys, which perfectly match with a group of ancient beings that the early Christians, the Gnostic Christians, called archons. These are non-organic beings that do not have a divine spark within them. We have it, they're jealous of us, and they want to take it from us. And when we look into the ancient world, we find that, for example, the first Christians especially were vitally concerned about the relationship with these archons and how to evade them and to get beyond them to return to the source of the heavenly realms from which we came. The way that the archons operate, it appears that they harvest human fear. They operate on the premise of terror. And what they seek to do is to keep Earth in its present status as a terror farm or a fear farm. And in my opinion, that's a large part of what's happening today. I mean, I've spoken before that in George W. Bush's inaugural speech, in a 14-minute speech, twice he asked the question, does the angel in the whirlwind still direct the storm? Does the angel in the whirlwind still direct the storm, referring to America? Well, when I looked up the source of that statement, it came from a poem by Joseph Addison, and the second or the third and fourth lines of the four-line quatrain in which that statement is contained says that the angel in the whirlwind directs this storm, and he hurls death and terror over the guilty land, which we presume to be America. And so the ultimate thing would be here to ask the question, is the Bush administration in league with the angel in the whirlwind, who indeed precisely matches with the description of the archons in the ancient world? And is this endeavor that we're all involved in Iraq a move by these watchers, as they are also called in the Bible? Is our endeavor there a means by which we are going to retrieve this technology for them, or is there some other scenario that's being painted here? I personally think that it all relates to this relationship between us and this extraterrestrial species. Our present administration is operating as minions of them, and we're all going to pay the price as a consequence of what they're doing and not telling us about.
Now, if they feed off our fear, we're headed for a mega catastrophe, a dieback of the human species, in fact. And I have seen a pattern in the Bush administration of intentionally ignoring these impending disasters when they would be easy to control, and pretending that they don't exist, like global warming. It's not rocket science to begin to effectively control the amount of emissions human species generate. But what we're not being told is that the sun is contributing to this. Most people don't realize it, but the polar caps on Mars are shrinking. On Mars. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't recall anybody on Mars. There's only one car on Mars, and it's electrically powered.
Right.
So there's no greenhouse gases being emitted by any human beings or anybody else up there that we know of.
Well,
let me just finish. Just a second. So what if they feed on our fear, and I'm willing to buy into that possibility, then why do they also want us gone?
Well, because it's part of the natural cycle, I think, Whitley, that you have not only the archons running the show, but you also have the forces that are interested in the ascension of the human species as well. And it appears that they in a sense, coexist. They don't cooperate, I don't think, but they found that they coexist with one another. And so what we have is this battle between these two forces constantly on this planet. The swords in that battle are human beings. And so we're caught in the middle, having to unplug ourselves from the overall terror program that's being implemented, and also then to plug ourselves into the Terra, or love and compassion program, that is simultaneously being offered at this time.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Whitley, all I was going to add is it's not only just Mars and Earth, but there's also been some findings about some of the moons of Jupiter. Whatever's going on is a solar system-wide phenomenon. It's not strictly global warming, although obviously if we were an intelligent species, you're right, we could be taking some rudimentary and common sense steps to cut down on the greenhouse gases and the pollution that we're destroying our own world with. But as William pointed out, there seems to be more than one player in all of this, and I think the key to this is to understand that throughout our history, written history, there has been this struggle going on, but it's been done covertly. And this might not have always been the way, because if you go back again to Zechariah Sitchin and his Wars of Gods and Men, you find that the Anunnaki, who apparently came from the heavens and settled here on the earth, before too long began to use humans as their pawns, and they would, they would fight their wars with us as surrogates. But today, of course, it seems to be very much hidden, and I suspect that this has to do with the Star Trek concept of the Prime Directive, okay, which is basically that the intelligent races in the universe, and I'm unclear on whether this might be an actual law that has enforcement or something, or whether it's more of a agreed upon understanding that it's just not proper to overtly interfere with the progress and evolution of an intelligent species. And as a result, I think they have to keep their struggle on the QT. And this is why we are always given these dog and pony shows. We have these wars, and there's always some kind of reason, and and then we see these disasters, and then we wonder if they're man-made or if they're contrived. And there's always a front show, because they have to operate in the shadows, because they don't want to be seen universally as violating the Prime Directive. And this gives me hope, because this means that we're not under the control of just one particular group. If we were under the control of some group of, say, aliens, and they had all this advanced technology, then why don't they just come down and eat us and burn our cities or whatever it is they're going to do? And the fact that they haven't done this yet indicates to me that there is a counterbalance going on, and we have just got to find out and separate the good guys from the bad guys and figure out who it is that we want to align ourselves with. And frankly, based on everything I know and based on what Whitley and William just said, I don't think the Bush administration are those folks. I don't think they're the ones we need to be aligned with.
Well, Edgar Mitchell,
promoting the fear.
Edgar Mitchell told me, and he's now spoken about this publicly, by the way, so I'm going to repeat it. He told me years ago that this is the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, the founder of the Institute for Noetic Sciences, for those of you who aren't familiar with the name, told me that the government had alien bodies, and that the bodies had been under examination for years because there were things about them that did not make sense. And I was of the impression at the time, having had enough relatively intimate contact with the Greys, that the Greys were not alive, that they were machines, biological machines. for the simple reason that I'll be honest, and I'm going to start, and I promise you I really will do this, folks, putting a little bit more on I guess I'm going to put it up in the subscriber section of what actually happened to me, because to be honest with you, I got so sick of these stupid rectal probe jokes being like the thing that was sort of what defined Whitley Strieber in the public eye after a while, and I thought, this is all we have? This is what we have to give? So I kind of just shut up about what was happening to me. And the result is that there's probably 200 or 300 hours of material that I have never talked about at all. Okay, that said, when you are close to the Greys and you can hear them breathing, it sounds like this. With the difference that it's so regular that it's kind of shocks you inside. It's not like a sound of a biological entity. It sounds like a machine working. And their movements, their gestures, their actions are fantastically precise, like a kind of a superb machine would be. And I also think, and I'll get into this another time, that they think like a brilliant machine would think. Okay, all of that said, what they are and who is behind them is another question entirely. And I have to wonder if we are even getting, that some malign alien species is out there and there's a kind of prime directive that's preventing them from screwing with us. I'm just not sure that that's the right way to go, because there are elements of this thing that are so bizarrely far off the wall. And I'll give you another example, William. And this is sort of, I think you might react to this. Bill Chalker is an excellent UFO researcher down in Australia. We had him on the show a few weeks ago with a book called Hair of the Alien. And he discovered got a hair from a guy who had been waked up in the enviable or unenviable position, depending entirely on your attitude, of being sat upon by this beautiful woman, weird though and scary. I mean, it would have been kind of a freak out, because here's this beautiful woman, but she's so weird that it's really, really scary, and she's naked and she's sitting astride you in the night and trying to make love with you, while another woman, equally weird, stands nearby. They left eventually after a struggle, and they left behind a long dark hair, which the guy gathered. He gave it to Chalker because he'd been reporting this stuff to Chalker for a while. Chalker had the hair DNA analyzed. There's plenty of DNA in the hair, and it was analyzed in an Australian laboratory, meaning that there was no intervention by the U.S. government making the laboratory lie, as happens here all the time. And the result was incredible. The hair consisted of elements of the DNA of two rare racial subgroups, one from China and one from the Basque country of Spain. And this was not somebody who had been come about because these two people from these two different areas had made love and had a baby. This was some kind of a clone that had been constructed. Now, all of that said, guys, where in the hell are we? Okay? Give me some answers. I don't envy you, by the way.
Well, if I had all the answers, we wouldn't be here today. But I will say this, and I think William will agree with me. Whatever is going on, it's coming to a climax. I think there is obviously a rush on. As you know, in my book, Ruled by Secrecy, I detailed the centuries-old plan for the New World Order and showed that the secret society members behind it can all be connected back through a series of secret societies going all the way back through history. But they've always moved slowly, and they've always taken, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Well, now they're taking 3 and 4 steps forward and only 1 step back. It seems to me that whatever the timetable is and whatever is going to happen will probably happen within our lifetime, and I think their whole little agenda is being rushed up. Would you agree, William?
I would say so, yeah, absolutely, Jim. And I think, Whitley, you nailed it in one of your columns on Unknown Country earlier this year, where you described these folks as rapture crazy. I really think that that's what's driving all of this, is a literal interpretation of biblical prophecy and the belief that they have to make these events manifest in order for Jesus or the Lord, or however you want to think of this figure, to call his church to heaven, as is prophesied in various texts. And today, what Jim and I are suggesting is that when the Bible describes Jesus calling his church to heaven, this rapture event, it sounds an awful lot like some kind of a transdimensional Stargate that we're talking about here. And I think that what they believe, the people in power, is that they must lock down these areas, Iraq, Iran, Syria. I mean, what they want more than anything is to have American tanks rolling through Damascus. What they want more than anything, I think, is to have American tanks rolling through Cairo. And all of this is about getting everything set up for what we might think of as a false rapture, and the introduction of a new alien god that was called Nebo during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, was called Jesus 2,000 years ago, and was called by various other names throughout time. I think that's what it's all getting set up for.
Boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could all just... that's really, really depressing. And incidentally, folks, we're not going to have a break. We're dispensing with the last break in the show, so we can go on a little longer. But I urge you, please subscribe to unknowncountry.com if you don't. And I know most of you don't, because 250,000 people listen to this. About 2,500 or 1% of you are actual paid subscribers to the website. And it depends absolutely on that. It can't live without that. Ann and I contribute about $750 a week to the running of the website. And we can't do that forever. We really can't, I assure you. And you need to do that. Anyway, that said, forget that. Let's go on.
Well, Whitley, let me add what I consider a positive note on all this, because again, what cutting edge physics, quantum physics, is beginning to show is that the whole universe is nothing but one complete energy grid, and no matter what you're talking about, another planet or a people versus inanimate objects with matter, we are still all part of this energy grid. And so with any energy, you have a positive and a negative, okay? And, of course, all the religions have talked about good versus evil, and black versus white, knowledge versus ignorance. So there's always a polarity there, and we've been talking about the more negative aspects, the fear factor and all like that. But I think maybe if there is these evil entities, then there's got to be benevolent entities, because there's got to be a balance in the universe. And I think what we were talking about, things kind of coming to a climax, and of course we're all well aware of the Mayan calendar that says the world ends on December the 21st, 2012. What I find fascinating, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but a Dr. Scott Hyman of Sweetbriar College and his associates have announced that they, two things that just really strike me. Number one, they have picked up low-frequency radio wave images coming from the center of our galaxy and seeming to be beaming outward. And then what we find is that...
I heard about that. Wait, Jim, I just heard in passing about that. Tell us a little bit more about that. I was fascinated by that.
I know it. This is really fascinating, because what they show is, number one, the precession of our sun. On December the 21st, 2012, our sun will be in a direct alignment with the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Now, isn't that interesting? And they say, too, that they have found these low-frequency emissions coming from the center of the galaxy. It's almost, I don't know, I'm not sure what to make of all this.
Well, low-frequency radio emissions affect the human body. They affect the brain. I'll tell you what the brain emits. It emits a radio signal. It emits a harmonic, a little section of an ultra-low frequency radio wave, which is in sync with ultra-low frequency waves that are always being emitted by the Earth itself. There is a connection there that we have never been able to determine if it had any kind of psychological significance, but when submarines, U.S. submarines back in the 50s and early 60s were experimenting with ULF, ultra-low frequency radio transmission, they discovered that certain frequencies would derange the people aboard the submarines, and the one that went down, the Thresher, might have been, disorient, might have gone down because the crew became disoriented during one of these experiments. So they have a profound effect on us. So where...
And it may already be affecting us because, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm forgetting now what the exact frequencies were, but it seems like that in years past, the human frequency was something like 7.8 megahertz or something like that.
It's something like that, yeah.
That's the Earth. Yeah, I covered this.
It's changed in recent years. It's now a different frequency.
I covered this subject I covered this subject in my lecture DVD, Stargate 2012, Surfing the Tides of the Milky Way. And
yes, you did. And folks, by the way, that's available from the unknowncountry.com store. It's on sale, in fact. Ann whispers in my ear. So get it. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, please get it, because it lays out the positive scenario and the potential that we have for taking advantage of this 2012 event, because they do indeed describe a zone of frequency that they called the field of the blessed, that our sun and solar system is entering into or on the receiving end of. These waves of radio waves that Jim is describing come onto this planet sort of like waves lapping onto a shore. And contained within them, the Mayans said, is something they called eats, or they called cosmic sap. And when I Googled cosmic sap, I found that SAP is in fact an acronym for subatomic particle. And what the Mayans are describing, and what indeed I'd matched it up with the early Christians, what they were describing is their ability to make an ointment or an oil out of these subatomic particles. Now, the way that this works is really intriguing, because what the cell phone industry is describing for us now is that our pineal gland is in effect a wireless transmitter that's capable of receiving, through that process of resonance, faint messages, even like those that are being detected now from the center of our Milky Way galaxy.
And
what can theoretically happen here, Whitley, and what I think we're all being asked to learn how to do, is how to decalcify our pineal gland so that we can enchrist our brains so that we're capable of receiving these messages, because contained within these messages are secrets that release the secretions from within our pineal gland that transmute us into higher beings.
We have come to the end of Dreamland, but not to the end of this conversation, guys. If you can continue with me for another half hour to 45 minutes, is that possible?
Sounds great.
Sure.
Okay, fabulous. We're going to continue this in the subscriber section. I want to know what to do, guys. I want to be in that number. And I think maybe, contrary to the screaming fundamentalist hate mongers who are sucking up the great mass of people, and maybe these are the ones that are going to be judged, maybe the little tiny group who know how to do what you just described are going to be the ones that do respond to this in a positive way and open themselves up to what Jesus admonished us and promised us was there, the kingdom of heaven within. This is Whitley Strieber. Next up on Dreamland, Linda Moulton Howe. And if you want to hear the rest of this, well, open that old creaky wallet of yours, undo the combination lock, spread away the spider webs, and take out the $11.95 that it will cost you to subscribe to what I think is the damn best website on the planet. And I'm speaking as its creator. Guess what? We'll be right back. You're about to experience something you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science discovery and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts the others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week she's reporting on bizarre eruptions in Oklahoma. That's right, Kingfisher, Oklahoma, where geysers are breaking out all over the county. Here she is from Albuquerque, New Mexico, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. And that's right, uncontrolled eruptions of methane gas, water, and mud were still spewing between Kingfisher and Okarche, Oklahoma, on Thursday, December 15th, after first appearing a week ago on Friday, December 9th. The unprecedented and so far uncontrolled eruptions of methane, water, and mud on a 12-mile-long stretch of Winter Camp Creek and surrounding fields continues to frustrate authorities. On December 15th, the bubbling gas was spreading south even further toward Okarche. The day before, the spreading methane caused 4 more eruptions in another wheat field about 2 miles from the city limits of Kingfisher, Oklahoma. Chesapeake Energy Corporation, an independent oil and gas exploration company, was drilling on December 9th, they admit that, about 8 miles from where the first gas and mud eruptions were reported in Section 2 of Kingfisher County. But no one knows for sure what is the link. Chesapeake said that it would start flaring off some of the escaping gas and try to capture and sell more of it. What no one knows is whether this will reduce the underground pressure of the gas enough to slow down or stop the continuing eruptions that have occurred since the morning of December 9th. Geologists are still trying to figure out what has happened and what can be done to control the potentially explosive situation. The first to report the eruptions on the early morning of December 9th were a couple of hunters who noticed the gas, water, and mud coming out of the ground in the Section 2 region of Kingfisher County. Each section is about a square mile, and you can see dramatic photos of those eruptions at my website, www.earthfiles.com, in the report at the top of the headlines page. The hunters called the game warden, who called the Kingfisher County Sheriff's Department, who called the Kingfisher Fire Department. Fire Chief John Crawford and his crew arrived at the scene of the first eruptions at 9 a.m. on Friday, December 9th.
It basically looked like a big mud hole with water and mud and gas coming out of the ground.
All concentrated in one area?
Well, no, it's not. It's over about approximately a 12-mile stretch throughout Kingfisher County.
Well, from your experience as a fire chief, do you have any personal thoughts about what could be happening?
The only thing that I can really think of is, something has caused pressure underneath the earth, underneath the Earth's surface that has created some kind of fracture in a like a shell bed or something underneath the earth that caused some cracks or something and let the gas escape through it and find its weakest spots.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen anything like it. Corporation Commission's never seen anything like it. All the experts out in the field, engineers have never seen anything like it. It's just, and geologists are digging and trying to find maps to, for the information under the earth crust, and to see if they can pinpoint what the situation is.
And is that presenting any danger to the public?
Well, yes, it can. I'm more concerned in a populated area. There's a lot more ignition sources in a populated area, and now it has progressed. It progressed from that point to about 1.5 miles, maybe west and south of Kingfisher. So it has progressed toward Kingfisher, but probably the last 36 to 48 hours, that had stopped, and we're thinking that it may have found a heavy shell bed, and the gas can't escape because it was headed right to Kingfisher. So we called in the 63rd Civil Support Team to help assist us in monitoring the lower explosive limits and higher explosive limits to find out, what kind of danger we were in, and that we were in that there is explosive limits out along this creek. There's no doubt about it. But, it also dissipates in the air. So, for it to explode, you have to, everything's got to be, you got moisture content in the gas coming up out of the ground. You've got humidity you deal with and wind you deal with. And, so, it's high. I would say it's unlikely that it would burn, but, when you get into the city limits of Kingfisher, you find all kinds of ignition sources. And so I had some serious concerns. Well, like I said, it had stopped, it's within about 1.5 miles southwest of Kingfisher, because it traveled 3 miles down the creek within about a 20-hour time frame.
Mm.
So anyway, it has stopped in the last 36 to 48 hours. It has not progressed toward Kingfisher. But yesterday afternoon, about 4 o'clock, we noticed another little feeder creek bubbling that was not bubbling the previous days. And now it has found another weak spot, like what we thought, and it's going back south toward the town of Okarche.
And so if this gas bubbling, let's say, broke out again and starts spreading, that it has about 1 mile left to go to get to the Kingfisher city limits.
Yeah, I would have to say probably 2 miles away the creek flows.
And right now, what do you and authorities think is the probability that might happen?
Well, this situation's really been unpredictable. I mean, it's just been very unpredictable. I feel very comfortable right now that it has stabilized and not going toward the Kingfisher area. But, the thing is, this gas could be, if it's moving along and it can't find its way through the shelf of the shale, but it does on the other, maybe 1 mile or 2 on down the road, which could be closer to Kingfisher. It could start bubbling up, depending on how long that shale bed is. Does it run all the way through Kingfisher? Does it quit right there at the edge of Kingfisher? We don't know. We have to shut our pagers and our cell phones off in those vicinities because of the explosive limits of the methane and gas coming up out of the ground.
So it's really dangerous for all of you to be out there where there's this much methane coming from the ground.
Yes, I mean, they're at explosive limits. The explosive limit is level 10, and sometimes you might read the level might be 2 or 3. It could be, 12 or 14. We've had it as high as, I think it was 37.
Wow. What was that, 37?
That's Section 2.
But if it went up to 37 explosive category, doesn't that mean that more gas is coming out of Section 2 than it was on Friday?
Oh, not. Yes, yes, but you have to think of moisture content. You got to think of humidity. You got to think. Like last night when it was tested, it was very calm weather, very calm, no wind. Today we've got probably 30-mile-an-hour winds out of the south, so you're not going to get those kind of readings.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of depends on the weather and the situation. Down along the creek bottom, I would expect to get probably 12 to 14. But you move up off the bank 10, 15 foot, it may go down to 2 or 3,
Right. And
sometimes even 0.
What is the range on that explosive gas range, from 0 to where?
Well, from what I understand, 0 to 10 is flammable, and anything above 10 is explosive.
Over the next 4 or 5 days, they're going to see if Chesapeake's flaring and starting to pipe some of this gas takes any of the pressure off of all of this bubbling along these 12 miles. If it doesn't, then Chesapeake isn't the answer. If it does, they still don't know exactly what has happened and how long it's going to take to get this under control. And at earthfiles.com, I'm going to continue to do daily updates with the fire chief about what the status is for Kingfisher and for Okarche in Oklahoma. So stay tuned to Earth Files for those daily reports. And now, while geologists and engineers are scratching their heads about the mysterious and continuing eruptions of methane in Oklahoma, far from Earth, out in Mars, is another mystery that scientists are trying to solve from an orbiting spacecraft that is now operating deep ground penetrating radar. It's called MARSIS, which stands for Mars Advanced Radar for Subsurface and Ionosphere Sounding. The mystery is, where did all the water go from the surface of Mars, which has many large meandering valleys that look like dry riverbeds on Earth? Did the water evaporate into space, or did it go underground? If Martian water is underground, can we find evidence of large ice layers, or even liquid water deep enough underground where the temperature might be warmer? For the first time in human history, Earth scientists are looking underground on another planet, Mars, for answers to those questions. The MARSIS radar was built to penetrate at least 5 kilometers beneath the Martian surface. And to the surprise of MARSIS mission scientists, the radar has penetrated so easily through one underground crater apparently filled with ice that MARSIS might be able to see 10 kilometers below the Martian surface if the location is filled with ice that is transparent to the radar. The MARSIS radar was supposed to be turned on in the spring of 2004, but the European Space Agency, responsible for the orbiting spacecraft's operation, decided it might be too risky then to unfold the big solar panels that provide power. After a year of computer modeling tests, ESA and NASA went forward in June of 2005 and turned the MARSIS radar on for the first time. The solar panels unfurled and the radar went to work. Since the MARSIS radar operates best in nighttime and the orbiter only has nighttime windows every 5 to 6 months, the first radar look into the Martian underground lasted only a few weeks into July of 2005. From that work, JPL scientists published their first results in the November 30th, 2005 issue of Science. The lead author and co-principal investigator for MARSIS is Jeffrey Plout, Ph.D. at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I talked with him this week about what the MARSIS radar has found so far.
In the polar regions, we saw a signal from the radar echoes that indicated the layered deposits consist of basically pure ice with only a small amount of dust mixed in. And this particular composition was not known. It was widely assumed that these deposits were mostly ice, but our measurements indicate that there's hardly any contamination by soil in those layered deposits.
Has there been any deep ground penetrating ability of the South Pole at all?
That's something we're working on at the moment, and we don't have any results to report right now.
And what about the crater?
Well, it's been widely recognized that in the northern plains of Mars, there is a buried population of impact craters from a previous surface before the northern plains were resurfaced. And what we were able to do with our ground-penetrating system was to identify a fairly large 200 to 300 kilometer diameter structure we believe to be an impact basin that was not recognizable from any surface measurements.
And how deep?
We believe the rim structure is very shallow buried, just a few hundred meters perhaps, but we also made a detection of a buried layer fairly deep, about 2 to 2.5 kilometers deep, that is either the floor of the basin or some intermediate layer of basin fill material. But we don't have any indications of liquid water from any of these observations, but it is very interesting that the signal penetrated quite easily through about 2 kilometers of material within this crater, and that suggests to us that material is probably ice-rich. So although we don't have signs of current liquid water. It's likely that at one time this crater was filled with liquid water, which quickly froze over and was trapped in the subsurface for probably several billion years.
And if you were sending radar into an area where there was liquid water deep in Mars, it's my understanding that Marsus can penetrate at least 5 kilometers underground, right?
The penetration depth depends on several factors. One is very important, is the material that you're penetrating through, and we've shown that that ice is actually fairly transparent to the radar. We could probably see 10 kilometers through pure ice. If there's a substantial amount of rock or soil, the penetration depths are much less. As for the question of detecting liquid water, if the liquid water is in the first few kilometers of the subsurface, we could probably see it, but again, it depends on what lies between the surface and any kind of liquid layer or aquifer. Mm-hmm. But to date, we don't have any evidence that we've detected any liquid water in the subsurface, but the search is really just beginning because we haven't had a significant amount of time to observe under optimal conditions.
Mm-hmm. What would be the difference to your trained eye between the radar going through ice versus water?
Well, the radar will not penetrate through water. It will reflect off of water. So if we see water is just about the most reflective kind of material we might expect to find on Mars. So if we should detect a very strong reflection in the subsurface, we can apply some analysis to the quantitative values of those radar echoes and make some kind of statement on whether it's possibly water. But again, we haven't reached that point yet. What we have seen in the case of the impact crater is a possible, again, this is only a possibility and it needs further analysis and more observations, but a possible indication that this crater at one time was filled with water, which has since frozen over. If that's a common process in the northern plains of Mars, then that's a potential reservoir for additional water that hasn't been identified yet because it's buried. So we're a few steps away from saying that we've identified a new or a previously unknown reservoir of H2O. This particular feature is right at the mouth of several of the major outflow channels, so it makes sense that this could be a place where water could get trapped, but whether that's just an accident of the location or whether it's a process that's common over much of the northern lowlands, we don't know yet.
And what is it that covered up the layer of craters?
Well, there's debate about that. Some kind of layer of material, and I guess the debate rages over whether that material was deposited by volcanoes, by additional flows of water and depositing sediment, or by wind activity moving dust around. There's not a uniform agreement in the community as to exactly what buried the northern plains.
President Bush has announced that he would like to see a manned mission to Mars in a couple of decades. What you're finding so far, would we be able to go to Mars and access the ice, let's say, in that buried crater and use it successfully for a Mars base?
You have to have several sort of if-then to answer that question. If we are correct and there is water ice in this crater, we suspect it's fairly shallow, that is a few hundred meters, but that could be much too deep for access by any kind of equipment that someday may be put down on Mars. So you need some sort of drill rig. May not be the easiest point to access ice on Mars.
And so ideally, if you could find an underground crater close to the surface at the equator that seemed to have ice, that would be ideal.
Yeah, I think so. I have heard discussions about accessible water, whether it's liquid or ice, as being an important factor for a manned mission.
Right.
So yeah, sure. If there were confirmed deposits of water ice at the low or mid latitudes, that could be important for a future manned mission.
For the next few months, Marsus will focus on the Martian southern hemisphere, And then the orbit will be on the day side, so they will back off for a while. And then toward the end of 2006, we'll get back into the night side in the northern hemisphere, where Marsus will look for more underground ice layers in that pole and where the orbit goes over the northern hemisphere. The mission is scheduled to continue for 2 more Earth years until the end of 2007. After that, it's up to the European Space Agency to budget more money to keep the radar going, because right now it's so healthy, those solar panels might keep it up there for a long time. And it's ironic that it's human budgets back on Earth that are controlling the length of these missions, Whitley.
Linda, it's most interesting because I guess we'll just have to see. Do you think they will continue the budget for it?
I think it's probably going to be dependent upon what the radar has found over the next 2 years,
right,
how complete it's mapped, and how it's going to fit in to this, I'm going to call it a plan for a Mars manned mission, because they may need very much this data to decide where, if we are going to start planning a manned mission to Mars, we're going to have to find some location near the equator, which is where it would be the warmest, the longest of any given Martian year. And then, as I had asked him, if it were in the cards, really luck, that we could find an underground source of ice that was not too deep and near the equator, then the manned mission would have water there at least to process.
Boy, I have to tell you, that would not be a mission I would like to go on. Of course, that'll never happen. But, you know, Linda, there's so much lore about Mars in the UFO world, including the fact has recently occurred again, that close movement of Mars close to the Earth, when Mars is in Earth opposition, UFO sightings increase. It's not that people are seeing Mars, it's unusually bright in the sky. The UFOs that are reported have nothing to do with the planet Mars. They're more or less normal UFO sightings. They just tend to be more of them and more elaborate. And, I have to ask the question, is Mars really what it seems? What do you think?
It's an interesting question, because in the human abduction, we'll call it the human abduction syndrome subject, there have been people who have said that they have encountered something that they considered to be non-human, taken aboard a craft. And in some of those cases, some people have said that they have some information that there, at least at some point, there has been some kind of extraterrestrial interaction with the planet Mars. If it's in the past, then would it be that only archaeology would be found by our manned missions exploring?
Well, if that's the case, though, and NASA sends the mission, then we will never know.
Because they would cover it up.
Of course. Simply because it's something not necessarily that should be kept secret, but because it's something that the bureaucracy at NASA doesn't expect, and therefore they won't talk about it.
Well, it's like they have to get past the hurdle of announcing we're not alone in the universe. And yes, Earth has been visited in the far distant past, the present, and no doubt in the future, and that in that timeline of visitations to the Earth, we know that there have been visitations and perhaps settlements on Mars, and it's like that's the so-called coherent story. And if they go to Mars and they do find artifacts, you're right, they probably wouldn't announce those before they get around to saying we're not alone in the universe on the Earth. Isn't it like we are living in an Alice in Wonderland time where everything is backwards and upside down?
Well, I go back a long way with the Mars Space Project. I was involved in it, I guess, by Richard Hoagland when it was very new, even so long ago that the Internet was just very, very new. There was no Internet. There was just email, and we were having an email conference about it. And among the things that, this was before I had my close encounter, and it was in September, I believe, before that, and it was almost as if my interest in Mars seemed to almost to trigger what happened to me then in December of 1985. I've never been certain of that, but it certainly felt that way to me. In any case, there was one of the people on this group, with De Pietro and Molnar, the original discoverers of the Viking face image, speculated that Mars might have been murdered. And a couple of years later, that I got a letter from a close encounter witness who had said that she had been approached while walking in the woods with her son by this little man in a dark blue uniform, dark blue, cobalt blue figure who had come out of a cave. And he said he was a rebel, and he wanted to tell her the truth about what was going on here. And he said there had been a war between Earth and Mars many, many thousands of years ago, and we had succeeded in destroying Mars as a livable planet, but they had captured our souls, and they called Earth dead forever. That was their name for it, and that we were condemned to die and come back into the physical again and again and again here. We could never ascend beyond the Earth plane, and that they were doing this to us. And it was absolutely bone-chilling fright that went through me when I called this lady up and talked to her about it, because she and her son, and they were just so matter-of-fact, and they were simple people, Linda. These were not complicated people, and they were not out to get anything. They just were telling me what they saw and heard, it seemed to me.
There are so many variations on so many stories about Mars. It is as if it provokes, whether it's mythology or that we have other intelligences telling 1,000 different stories to 1,000 different people. There still is this amazing question on the science and the geology of that planet. What did happen to the water? And if it went into space, why? And if it went underground, why?
Why,
and
exactly.
And that in 2 years, this really excites me, that within 2 years, we may have many more answers to this question about Mars' finding lots more ice underground. And if they have found this much ice in one crater that is under a surface layer, how many more might they find? And if they find a lot of ice under the surface of Mars, that would make setting up some kind of base there much easier. Much easier.
Linda, we're about to come to the close of Dreamland, end of our time together, and I just want to leave you with this thought, folks. One of the people who worked on the original Mars face reimaging said to me within the past year, he said, when I saw the new images of the Mars face, it was immediately obvious to me that the site had been disrupted. It has been changed. It is not the same as it was when it was taken by the Viking orbiter.
And if so, who's doing the planetary engineering?
Well, somebody messed up the face. Somebody messed up the artifact so that when we saw it in more detail, it would no longer look like what it actually was, and now everybody's just assumed it's nothing, and they've all forgotten about it. I don't think so. I think that we live in a sea of mysteries, a dark sea of mysteries, folks. And on that note, Linda and I are going to say goodbye to you. Have a happy, happy Christmas. Dreamland will be featuring a rerun over the Christmas weekend, and then over the New Year's weekend, we're going to be listening to John Hogue's last year's prophecies, his 2004, end of 2000.
This in 1998 with Art Bell, saying, it's well known that Saddam Hussein has this belief that he is the reincarnated biblical king Nebuchadnezzar. And as many prophecy watchers had noted back during the first Gulf War in 91, Saddam had spent over $500 million rebuilding Babylon throughout the 1980s. He did this because he believed that he had to duplicate the feats of Nebuchadnezzar and also ultimately to outdo him. And of course, this was something that Christian prophecy watchers were all over because according to certain interpretations of Christian prophecy in the book of Revelation and elsewhere, in order for the Lord to return, Babylon must be rebuilt. It must be rebuilt because it has to be destroyed in order for the Lord to return. And so a lot of people were anxious, to say the least, back in the early or late 80s, early 90s about just exactly who was Saddam Hussein, why did he believe he was Nebuchadnezzar, and why was he spending close to, well, what ended up being almost $1 billion to prove to the Iraqi people that he was indeed the return of this tyrant and dictator from the ancient world.
Well, hey, William, pardon me, correct me if I'm wrong, because my Baptist Bible school knowledge may be a little flaky at this point, but didn't old King Nebuchadnezzar, didn't he build a gold-based artifact in an effort to reach his godlike ancestors and to gain immortality? And then this artifact was translated down to us in the Bible as a fiery furnace, but obviously it was something else because people would go in it and come out of it.
Well, what happened is that in the book of Daniel, we're told specifically that Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon had constructed, well, it was actually located on the plain of Dura, a hulking golden image of the beast, as it was called. And he had difficulty getting this contraption, whatever it was, to operate. He tried dancing, he tried music, he tried clapping. He had this just enormous piece of hardware, but did not apparently have the software to make the thing go. But he knew that
that's why I had to go find those three Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right?
That's exactly right. So what he does is he gets awareness that the Israelite priest, the wise men at the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, had apparently the software to make this thing go. So what does he do? He does what any dictator is going to do. He invades Jerusalem, loots the Temple of Solomon, and returns to Babylon with thousands of captives, among them Daniel, the prophet Daniel, among them Ezekiel, and among them three wise men you just mentioned, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they get back to Babylon, and things are going okay, I guess, for Nebuchadnezzar, because he thinks things are starting to turn his way. But these Hebrew wise men, or Jewish wise men, are reluctant to participate in Nebuchadnezzar's endeavor until he makes a wager with them that if they can enter this fiery furnace that is connected to this golden image of the beast, apparently, and return successfully, that Nebuchadnezzar will convert to their religion. And so
Correct.
this they do, but the amazing thing about it is that you really can't get a handle on this story unless you've been through the works of, for example, Zecharia Sitchin, who's done so much to lay out the original Sumerian text and the belief in these gateways that the Anunnaki gods of ancient Iraq were using to come and go from Earth and the heavens. And one of the key components to Sitchin's interpretation of these myths involves the goddess Mari, or Mary. He makes a fascinating study of the various accoutrements that this goddess wore. She put on a helmet called her Shigura helmet, which means that which makes go far into the universe. She put on her Pala garment, also called her miracle garment, which made her an extraordinary being, also called a Nephilim. And she put on other accoutrements preparatory to entering the gate of the gods. Now,
that's especially interesting because isn't it true that before the three Hebrew priests, Shadrach, Meshach, I've always said Abednego, but anyway, and when they put them into this fiery furnace, it states that they didn't just go in, they donned their garments and put on their hats and their capes and their cloaks, which means they put on some kind of protective clothing. Do you think that's the same thing as this Mari was wearing?
I'm absolutely convinced, and that is actually, in my opinion, the whole linchpin right there that opens up the entire Iraq Stargate story, and is without it. I mean, you have a lot of people, Jim, that go around saying Saddam had a Stargate and we're over there for the Iraqi Stargate event, and I have people ask me about it all the time, and I say, well, explain to me how that connection is made. And they don't have a connection unless they've read my stuff, because the connection comes solely from this event in the book of Daniel, and the understanding that when these three wise men put on their coat their hat, and the other garments, as recorded in the book of Daniel, they are putting on the garments of this former goddess, because what they're going to do is enter a gate of the gods, what today we would call a stargate or a wormhole, a connecting link that joins point A on Earth with point B in the universe, as if there's nothing in between.
Exactly. And to me, the proof of this, and the proof that they had some sort of a transportation chamber, maybe it's teleportation, who knows, but is that when they got in there, King Nebuchadnezzar, who, since he had lost so many people trying to make this thing work, obviously didn't want to get near it himself, he asked his minions, are those three priests still in there? And they said, yes. And he says, are they dead? And then they said, no, they're in there moving around. In fact, there's a fourth person in there. And he said, oh, who's the fourth person? And right there in the Bible it tells us, oh, it's the Son of God. And then that's the end of that. We never hear any more out of that. I'd like to know who that fourth person, the Son of God, was and whatever happened to him, but the fact
his name was Nebo,
and four people were there indicates that it is a portal to somewhere.
Yeah, the name of the person, Jim, was Nebo. We know this because Nebuchadnezzar took his name from this god. Nebu, or Nabucodonosor, comes from this Iraqi god, Nebo, which means the high one, the royal one. Think of our word noble. We still use the word today. It means royal or high one, and he was actually the son of Marduk, one of the ancient Sumerian sun gods, an Anunnaki lord. Not only did Nebo come back, Jim, his wife was with him. And we know for a fact, we know for a fact that the Iraqis, the ancient Sumerians, the Babylonians built ziggurats for Nebo to honor this event. They filled these libraries chock full of tablets about and from Nebo. Now, Nebo is not someone that most of us are familiar with, but you probably will recall or understand who this figure is if I give you his alternate names: Hermes, Mercury, Thoth, Jesus. All of these figures are enfolded in this exact same archetype.
Yeah, all of them messengers from the gods.
Exactly. And so this is where we now come into the modern era, and we pick up the story of Saddam Hussein beginning in the late 80s and early 90s, doing a little bit of mythological research. And then my mythological profiling of Saddam, again, going back to 1998, it's very clear that he had
separate rooms separated by many miles of geography, so they may not be able to actually fist fight in front of us, but I'm not so sure they're going to be disagreeing, as they are kind of coming into a wild sort of confluence between William Henry's expertise as I think perhaps the only professional mythologist around, and Jim Mars's ability to look at the future and what it may mean to us, and kind of overlay that with a little bit of conspiracy. So I'm going to just kind of take a back seat here and listen to these two guys as they talk about energy, our future, and how it's changing, and what that means in terms of the past. Welcome, William Henry and Jim Mars.
Thank you, Whitley, very much. Yeah.
Let me jump in here if I can, William. I think I can get you right on track. I think, we've just passed the mark here where we have now lost 2,000 Americans in Iraq, and that is, of course, the ones that they're admitting to. There is considerable controversy, as many people don't realize, that perhaps some of the casualty figures in Iraq are skewed, and I think there's something to that. For example, if someone is wounded in Iraq and then shipped to Germany to a hospital and they die there, somehow they don't get counted as a casualty in Iraq. But be that as it may, it should be patently obvious to anyone right now that our precipitous invasion and occupation of Iraq obviously had little or nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. The idea that that was a mistaken belief was laid to rest by the Downing Street memo. So then we're saying, well, we're there to get their oil. Well, that can't be right either, because all you have to do is look at the doubling of gas prices over the past year and the fact that we're not even getting as much oil out of Iraq now as we were before our invasion. So we finally kind of get back to, well, we're just trying to bring freedom and democracy, and that wears pretty thin, too, when you look at the neo-colonial policies, foreign policies of the United States. So there seems to be another reason. There seems to be some other provocation, some other reason that we had to get into Iraq, and I know that you have studied and thought on that, William, so why don't you lay out your thoughts on why do you think we really had to rush into Iraq?
Well, actually, it isn't necessarily a rush at this time. I started talking about identified himself with this figure and was particularly interested in any of that knowledge that was brought to earth by what the book of Daniel refers to as the Son of God, or one like the Son of God, depending upon the interpretation that you read, who was actually Nebo, Hermes or Thoth, and who bequeathed to humanity immense libraries that contained cylinder seals and tablets that had tremendous knowledge etched upon them.
Now we're hitting on it. See, there are those who say we invaded Iraq to get hold of the Stargate as if it was some sort of a material artifact like in the movie Stargate. But for me, and I'll let you comment on whether you think I'm on the right track or not, but for me, I think they were after those steels and cylinder seals and tablets because they thought that it might give them the secrets for manipulating energy at the atomic and subatomic level, such as the orbitally rearranged monatomic gold elements that have been talked about and patents have been filed on in recent years. Do you think that they were after a physical object, William, or do you think that they were just after the knowledge that might be in these recently discovered artifacts? And by the way, I have the press releases are news stories from the Associated Press and others beginning in 1997, 98, 2000, 2001 that said they were German and French archaeology teams were making amazing new discoveries in Iraq, specifically the ancient Sumerian cities of Ur and Uruk. And, of course, where would they be taken? They would be taken to the Iraqi National Museum and probably placed until they could be cataloged and prepared for exhibition. And that's exactly what got looted when we invaded Baghdad, right?
Well, absolutely, and it actually began before that with the UN weapons inspectors. When you read the art magazines, they all talk about how many of those inspectors were coming out with their pockets loaded with these lipstick-sized cylinder seals that are priceless. And, you know, you and I, we're guys, okay? We're average guys. We're researchers, and we scour the art magazines, we scour the archaeology magazines, we scour the Internet, looking for samples and examples and evidence of this technology that we're describing here in this science. And you know,
gentlemen, we have to scour something else.